According to Mayo Clinic, Alzheimer's disease is a brain disorder that gets worse over time. It's characterized by changes in the brain that lead to deposits of certain proteins. Alzheimer's disease causes the brain to shrink and brain cells to eventually die. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, which is a gradual decline in memory, thinking, behavior, and social skills. These changes affect a person's ability to function. Alzheimer's is a fairly common disease, as more than 5 million Americans are currently affected by it. There are 4 genes that have genetic variations that contribute to Alzheimer's: the APP gene, the PSEN1 gene, and the PSEN2 gene for early onset Alzheimer's, and the APOE gene for late onset Alzheimer's. The 23andMe test tests for the E4 variant in the APOE gene. This is the most important variation tested, as the E variant in the APOE gene is associated with an increased risk of developing late-onset Alzheimer's. This gene is in charge of providing instructions for the apolipoprotein E. It is not exactly known how the E4 allele is associated with developing Alzheimer's. However, it is related to an increased production of protein clumps in the brain that may cause death of nerve cells. A major limitation of the 23andMe test is that it only tests for one variant in one gene. It does not test all known alleles of the genes, nor for variations of all the genes.
Our SNP-Chip test would test the 6 most common SNPs associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's, which are APP RS637-50847, APOE RS7412, and RS429358, PLD3 RS143999145, TREM2 RS759326228, and TM2D3 RS1397095573. For example, on the TREM2 gene, the RS75932628 variant in the gene increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease by affecting the levels of the triggering receptor protein in the TREM2 and TYROBP proteins. The triggering receptor protein made by the TREM2 gene is made in myeloid cells produced in bone marrow. The TREM2 protein interacts with the TYROBP protein, and together they activate the myeloid cells. The complex these two proteins make also work in the central nervous system in immune cells called microglia to protect the brain and spinal cords from foreigners, and they remove debris and dead nerve cells.
With our genetic test, you can get more insight that goes beyond what other tests like 23andMe can offer.
23andMe primarily tests for the SNP RS429358CT. Individuals with this SNP are 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's. However, we test for RS7593262 which is associated with a 3.5 times increase in developing Alzheimer's. This SNP is more indicative of Alzheimer's than the one 23andMe tests for. Additionally, we test for more variations than 23andMe does. Unlike 23andMe, we will delete your genome after we process it, so in case of any data breaches, your genome will not get leaked.
As you can see here, we focus on 6 total SNPs across 4 crucial genes: the APOE gene, the PLD3 gene, the TM2D3 gene, and the APP gene. This slide shows the different SNPs within each respective gene we test for and how they impact your chances for developing Alzheimer's disease. On the left, you can see the variants associated with increased chances for developing Alzheimer's. On the right, you can see the SNP RS6375047 with the A allele from the APP gene actually decreases the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease by 400%. Now, with all this being said, it is important to consider that our test does have some downsides to consider. For example, even if someone has one or more of these SNP variants, it does not mean they are certain to develop Alzheimer's. While specific variants are associated with the increased risk, having them does not guarantee that Alzheimer's will develop. For many deciding to take this test, it depends on your financial situation. But if Alzheimer's runs in your family, we highly recommend considering it. Catching early signs could save you money in the long run.